stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting. In my work with coaching clients, I guide people to improve their communication using storytelling as the foundation of our work together. What I've realized over years of coaching and podcasting is that the majority of people don't realize the impact of the stories they share on their internal messages and on the people they're sharing them with. My work with leaders and people who aspire to be leaders follows a similar path to the interviews on my podcast, uncovering pivotal moments in their lives and learning how to share them, to connect more authentically with others, to make their presentations and speaking more engaging, to reveal patterns that have kept them stuck or moved them forward, and to improve their relationships at work and at home. My guest today is Veronica Valadez. And I met her through a wonderful woman that I interviewed a few weeks ago, Alana Sheeran, who produced the movie Listen Closely. And I'm so grateful for the introductions Alana has made. She knows a lot of beautiful, intelligent, super compassionate women who are doing really interesting things. And so I'm grateful today to have Veronica on Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so very much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So, Veronica, I always start my podcast by asking my guest a question that helps the listeners have some context for who you are, so that when they hear our more personal stories, they have a different image in their head for who they're listening to and their voice. So the question is, would you please share something with us about yourself that most people might not know? Something that wouldn't be on your bio or your resume or on your website?
One thing in particular that sticks out is, and I don't share this with many people, is that I used to work in the fields picking strawberries with my family as a little girl. Went back before it was illegal to have children working in the field. So that's definitely something about me that played a huge role in my development. And so,
wow, I can imagine that, because you said you grew up in Santa Maria, California.
I did. I grew up in Santa Maria, California. It's a agricultural town, and there's still so many fields out there and so many field workers who right now are working under heavy smoke with all the California fires that are going on. And so I was born to immigrant parents whose only source of income was working in the fields. And during the summers when we weren't in school, our parents couldn't afford daycare, and so we loaded all of us up, my siblings and I, who are older than myself, in the car at like 4 or 5 in the morning, and it was still dark out. So we'd go out to the fields, and my younger sister and I, we were the babies of the family. So my older siblings and my parents would start their working in the fields and picking strawberries, and we were in the cars with the windows down, of course. And we were able to sleep in a couple more hours. And then when we woke up, we would always find a thermos with some warm food in there that my mom left for us. So we'd eat our breakfast, and then, we'd work our way out of the car and come out into the fields and say hi and good morning to everyone. And it was, a family atmosphere. And then, we played. They allowed us to play, and we're just running around the fields being kids. But then we also just started working, and they said, hey, if you want to earn some money. And I'm like, sure, I want to earn some money. And that's how I earned my money over the summer. And I used that money to help buy clothes for the coming school year.
Wow. How old were you?
I was in elementary school. So I want to say
7, 8.
Yeah. We're very young.
Wow. And it just felt like your day. It wasn't anything new or different. It was just how you were doing your day, right?
Exactly. We just moved through the world as a family unit, and we were surviving as a family unit, and I didn't know any better. And I didn't see it as something that was terrible. We weren't, I didn't see or understand, at least, how farm workers were being mistreated or exploited. I was just happy to be around my family and happy to play outdoors and happy to make a few bucks, if I could. Right. Looking back, I can see how wrong that was in so many ways. But at the time, as a young child, I was just happy to be close to my family.
Wow, that is something that I wouldn't have thought about it in terms of something we wouldn't know about you, but that makes so much sense. Do you remember eating strawberries as you picked them?
Oh yeah, a straw all the time. And so what they had us kids doing, and we ate so many strawberries, it's not even funny. I think some of my family members were just like so sick and tired of strawberries, but I always loved strawberries. I never got sick of them. And my birthday's in April, so that's like at the top of the strawberry
Peak
season, right? So I'm just like, yes, peak season, all these big, giant, juicy strawberries. I loved it. And I always wanted strawberry pie for my birthday. And I just couldn't get enough of strawberries. But what they had us kids doing is we would pick the overripe strawberries that were, they couldn't sell them in the regular little strawberry crates. As when you buy strawberries, they're still a little green.
Right.
But we were picking the over ripened strawberries, and those are the ones that they make jams and jellies out of. So, yeah. So actually I'm not a big fan of strawberry jam or jelly. I don't know if it was for that reason, but I love the fresh strawberries. I can't get enough of them.
The texture is different. It's a completely
Definitely.
different texture.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in texture being a huge contributor to whether you like or don't like a food. I know some people don't see that. It's a flavor thing, but for me, it's all about texture. Like I cannot eat okra. Ugh. Okra and eggplant are the two things. My husband just laughs because he loves those, and just ugh, the texture just grosses me out. That difference. And one of my best friends spent some time in Haiti as a little girl, and the avocados would just drop from the tree and be mush. And so when I met her, we were both in our late 30s, and she would not eat avocado because the texture was just, she would have this memory of these mushy, gross avocados. And that's hilarious. Did you ever, do you remember anything in particular, like a particular time when you were out there picking strawberries, that something went really well or something went badly? Was there an accident you witnessed? Or
No, I didn't witness anything like that. I do remember what I loved about it is that they just let us be kids when we wanted to be kids. And so we had a lot of strawberry fights and a lot of mud fights. And so we were rambunctious, just running through the fields. And we came home a hot mess. We were just covered in mud and strawberry, and we're just throwing, and we didn't get in trouble. I don't remember getting in trouble. Maybe we did, but I don't remember. And I remember it. I remember having fun and just playing with the other kids. And so, and I know that it's not an ideal situation for children or for families and exploited farm workers at all. And I completely see it through a different lens now, but I'm grateful for that opportunity because it really formed who I am today. But I do remember just throwing mud at each other and big rotten strawberries. That was the funnest part.
That's what I was imagining when you said you were picking the overripe strawberries. I'm like, boy, that would be tempting.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Good times.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow. Well, that gives me so much imagery for who you are today. So I really appreciate you sharing that story, that particular episode in your life. That's terrific. So the next thing I'd love to kind of lean into is, so our audience knows about what you do. Can you tell us a little about what you do, what wakes you up in the morning, what you love about what you do?
There are so many things that wake me up in the morning, and they're all really tied to one big umbrella, and that is social justice. That's what keeps me going every day, all day long. And everything I do is really centered around that. And I do that as an artist, as a visual artist, as a performing artist, which I'm a traditional Aztec dancer. And I do that as an educator. And I do that as an activist, as an organizer, community builder. Everything that I do really revolves around social justice. And that's my passion. And there's so much turmoil going on in our society right now. So you can imagine I'm just so busy working on so many issues and working with so many people and trying to create a better world for us, one that is sustainable, not only for the planet, but for society and for our own humanity. And so I I became an Aztec dancer when I was an undergraduate student at UCSB. And when I was at UCSB, and by the way, I'm the first in my family to go to a university. And I had to figure it out on my own. I had to navigate that on my own because my parents did not have a formal education, although they were very big on education. And my older siblings, they went through the school system, graduated from high school. I had one sister who joined the Air Force, another one who went to community college for a while, but I was the first to go to a four-year university. And so that was, it was a culture shock for me because I grew up in an immigrant farm working family. I grew up in the projects of Santa Maria, so I was only around people of color. And so when I went to UCSB, all of a sudden I felt extremely tiny in a sea of people that looked nothing like me and did not have the same experiences that I did. And so that was very bewildering for me. But I did major in Chicana and Chicano studies, which was my saving grace because I really started to learn about my identity and the history of our people in this country and our contributions and our struggles. And so that really put into context for me, really understanding the system and why my family was in the situation that we were in, why I grew up in poverty, why immigration happens, why we were having to be farm workers, and how people are exploited for their labor. And so I really understood at a much larger level why I was in the situation that I was in. And then not only that, but to really understand who I was at such a deep level and connect with my ancestors and all of these generations that came before me that fought for us. And I never knew that in my K through 12 education. And so I really felt robbed of my identity. I felt so robbed not knowing who I was and where I came from. And I almost felt like someone told me I was adopted. You think you know who you are, and then all of this is just presented to you. And it's just like, what? I have no idea who I am. No idea who I am. And so I really embraced the learning opportunity there. And obviously I also became very politicized because that's what that discipline is meant to do, is to really understand the political struggles that we face as minorities or minoritized peoples. And so I became very active. And then it was also during that time when I became a traditional Aztec dancer. And that led me to learn so much more about myself that I wasn't going to learn even within the discipline of Chicana and Chicano studies at the university, because at the end of the day, it's an institution. And so my learning in a grassroots, indigenous, traditional setting just opened up yet another door that led me to much deeper learning about who I was as an indigenous person to this continent, right? And I started to learn about our history and the history of colonization for hundreds of years, and the fact that our ancestors were punished and executed if they were caught practicing these dances and these songs or anything that had to do with our ancestral traditions and culture, but somehow they kept it alive underground in secrecy, so that 500 years later, I had access to that. And I was so very, very thankful that I did have access to that.
So you're really kind of going from the academic knowledge of the history to embracing the emotional and ethnic history, from understanding the academics and what people can see from the history versus what people feel in that history. And I keep getting drawn to the fact that you felt like you didn't really know who you were until then, even though I would like to kind of back that up a little and say you did know who you were in the context of how you were raised.
Yes.
And I'm curious if you remember anything happening in your household that would have given you some cues about your cultural background. I mean, And the reason I'm asking this, let me just explain a little bit about why I'm asking about this. Judaism has a lot of the same history. You know, the Jews were kicked out of all kinds of places and punished and murdered if they were caught speaking Hebrew or doing the Sabbath or other ceremonial things all through history. You know, 5,000 years of murders and isolation.
Mm-hmm.
And when you said that they were doing it hidden and keeping these cultural, beautiful traditions and ceremonies alive in a very subtle and discreet way so that they could 500 years later still share that with you. I'm curious about what aspects of your culture were hidden in your family that you experienced that now you look back and go, oh, that's where that came from. That's why my parents did things that way.
Honestly, even in Mexico, the what is taught there is very Eurocentric. It's from the Spaniards' perspective, and definitely not from an indigenous perspective. And so, and again, my parents didn't really have a formal education, so the only thing that they knew was their day-to-day life, living in a small, ranch town in Mexico and living off the land. And so, the traditions of speaking Spanish and being very Catholic and all of those very Mexican colonized traditional practices, right? So it was that version that was handed down to me. There was nothing that really stuck out for me to say, oh, that's indigenous. And that didn't happen until years later when I understood that the Virgen de Guadalupe within the Catholic Church was an indigenous woman, right? And she spoke Nahuatl. And so that's when I understood it's like, oh, that's how the indigeneity was woven into Catholicism in order to convert indigenous people to the religion. And right. So, but bait. And that was, it was bait. And that was the only clue, but I didn't make that connection until later.
Wow. Was that an academic connection that you made, or was that something through your learning to do the Aztec traditional dance?
Both, actually. Mm-hmm. And the academic experience to that was just the history of the process of colonization and the conversion of indigenous people to Catholicism, and how the Virgen de Guadalupe was used, like you said, as bait. And then within the Aztec dance tradition, I learned that she was actually known as Cuauhtlaxauhpe, her Nahuatl name, her indigenous name. And then I learned what all the conversation that she was having with Juan Diego in Nahuatl. You can pick out what was really being said through that indigenous language that doesn't translate very well in Spanish, right? That only those that live and experience a Nahuatl life, existence would understand what those things mean. And so then I looked at it through that perspective, and it taught me a whole different side of it. So so in academia, you're going to learn the historical facts about it, and through the traditional Aztec dance, you're going to learn really like the symbolism behind all of the indigenous concepts that came with that.
And did you learn language so that you could understand those subtle differences?
Yes, I did. So I've been an Aztec dancer now for, oh my goodness, going on 24 years.
Wow.
And so one can't help but to pick up the language, and most people within the tradition, they speak English and Spanish, right? But because there are certain concepts that you can't translate, then you also pick up Nahuatl. You start to learn about the Aztec calendar and the number system and the names of dances and all of these concepts and ideologies that are rooted in the language. So yeah, I definitely picked up the language. I'm not a fluent speaker, but I know enough to know the syntax and how the language works, so I can look at the root word and all the components of a word or a concept, so I can really look into what it really means.
Right.
Because once it's translated into Spanish and then translated into English, it has a whole different significance. So you really have to get to the root of it.
Oh, I love that. It's like the game operator
Yes.
or telephone, where the game operator, where you sit in a circle with like a dozen people around and you whisper one sentence to the person next to you and the next person whispers it to the next person. And it never comes back exactly the same. It could even come back in the same words, but the context is different. And so it sounds different. The stress is in the wrong place, or the comma showed up differently. And so it came out differently by the time you got to the 11th person. And I describe the Bible that way sometimes. I'm like, well, and that's given that everybody intends to have the message be clear and accurate. But you always have at least one or two people in a dozen people that want to make it funny, or they want to make it a little different. And so they take that sentence and they shift it to their own manipulation. And so sometimes it comes back completely different. And the same thing happens when you're translating languages. You miss certain key concepts. I noticed that in Hebrew and in Yiddish, which is interesting.
And that's a really good point and a good analogy, because of that, there's so many misinterpretations about Mesoamerican peoples. There's so many, and many of those very damaging and very dehumanizing towards our people. And I believe that that's led to a lot of the mistreatment of the descendants of our ancestors, which is us. And so there are a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings. And so I've been just fortunate enough to really dig deep and to unlearn a lot of that and relearn it through an indigenous lens and through that perspective and that language anchored in the indigeneity. So I get a whole different version of it. It's like, wow, I thought it was this all along. And then it ends up being completely opposite. And so, I've just been grateful to be able to continue to learn. And there's so much to learn. It goes on. And I feel like I'm still a novice learner about my Mesoamerican indigenous culture, because there's just vast amount of knowledge and information out there. So I'm always constantly learning and learning and learning. And I don't know, I really don't think I'll ever finish learning, because there's just so much.
Well, gosh, I would hope not. I mean, I was raised in a traditional Jewish household, and with Sunday school and Hebrew school, and I had a bat mitzvah, and I had a confirmation, and was married under the traditional chuppah, the canopy over the bride and groom and the rabbi. And yet, same. I mean, my husband will send me an article about some Jewish heritage thing that I had no idea. So I love that. There's something really comforting about that, because to me, what that means is that you and I, as that next generation, are also carrying that knowledge and learning and shifting it, because whatever happened 100 years ago is in that perspective of constant change and growth and learning. So I love that you're still learning. I would hate to hear that somebody decided that they've learned enough.
No, I consider myself a lifelong learner for sure. And being an educator, I guess I kind of have to.
Yes, absolutely. So I keep coming back to this vision of you going on campus at UC Santa Barbara for the first time. Did you get to go as a high school student to check it out? Were you in one of the programs that allowed you to go, or did you go yourself and just say, I want to go look at the campus? Or how did that transpire?
Okay, so let me get into that story a little bit. So another thing a lot of people don't know, and it's not anything that I don't hide, but it's also not something that you would typically put on a bio. I was a teen mom in high school, almost dropped out, and I had to go to continuation school to make up credits in order to graduate. So I did graduate, and then in that summer, in August, I gave birth to my son. And a lot happened in life between those young years as a child, playing in the strawberry fields, to adolescence. And I grew up in a household with the most amazing mother that anyone could wish for. And I get choked up, so I'm sorry. But my mom, there were 6 of us. She had 6 of us. And when she married my father, they were married in Mexico. And he was a widower, and he had 6 children of his own. Yes. So my mother, who was absolutely beautiful and gorgeous, marries my father, takes on his 6 children. And then they eventually immigrate to California after they got married. And then she had my 4 older siblings while still taking care of my half brothers and sisters.
Yeah, your half siblings.
Yes,
wow.
my half siblings. And some of them were in Mexico, and it took time to bring them all over. So it was just kind of in stages. And she took that on. Unfortunately, my father was an alcoholic, and he was abusive. And so my mom had to deal with a lot of that while trying to raise all of these kids. And so by the time I was born, my father was still very much suffering from this disease that he couldn't break from, and was still very much being abusive to my mom. So I was also growing up in that very toxic environment. And my mom did everything she could to take care of all of us and to keep us fed and to keep us in school while living through this very traumatic experience and just trying to hold it all together. I believe, and a lot of our siblings, my whole family believes, that my father was also suffering from mental health issues that he was just never diagnosed.
Of course, yeah.
And so there was a lot going on there. A lot going on. He was bipolar. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, but just from what I could gather, because he could be very, very loving and very caring for his family. And then when he started drinking, it was just a completely different person. And his very negative and abusive behavior was very much focused on our mother. He never behaved in such a way towards me. I never saw him behave that way towards my siblings too much. He kind of did at times when they were defending my mother and stopping him from being abusive. And he was already in that frame of mind, but towards me and my younger sister, we were the babies. He never even raised his voice at me. He never scolded me. He had me with him. I was with him all the time. I spent more time with him actually than I did with my mother, because my mother was tending to everyone, and he was just, kind of hanging out, drinking his beer. And so I was just kind of hanging out with my dad, and not really, now I'm putting the pieces together, but at that point I just wanted to be with my dad. And, and when I would spend time with him, he was always just very loving, and always talking about how much he loved us, how much he loved our mother, and, how he wants the best for us. And so, so that was very difficult.
You were really sheltered from it.
Yeah.
And when did you find out? Was it your siblings that kind of told you, or did you suddenly see it?
No, I saw it. I saw it. There was no way that I couldn't see it.
But it was just too contradictory for your young brain to really.
Yeah, because I believed that he was a good person with good intentions, and that he just didn't have control over this behavior.
Right.
Because he really shared a lot with me, and I don't think that he shared that much with my other siblings, who at that point were just angry at him and tired of his behavior, which is completely understandable.
Right, of course.
So when I was in elementary, I want to say I was in about 5th or 6th grade. At that time, elementary schools went up to 6th grade. One of his brothers, one of my uncles, passed away in Mexico. So he went to the funeral, and he never came back. He did try to keep in touch with letters and phone calls, and then that eventually faded away. And so the loss of my father, even though I think it was for the best, because it was very toxic, and my mother had gone through so much, and she didn't deserve that. But nonetheless, it was very traumatic for me to lose my father like that. And so obviously that impacted me as an adolescent, and it really caught up with me. So I, just didn't know how to love myself. I felt abandoned. I felt empty. I felt angry, and I just was not on a good path, which led me to not doing well in school, eventually looking to fill this empty void and not making good choices, eventually led me to becoming a teen mom. However, once my son was born, or once I became pregnant, like that's kind of like the wake up call that I needed to get my life in order.
Right.
and understand that I was now responsible for another life, and that I didn't want to feed the cycle. I wanted to break the cycle and provide for my son the best that I could. And so I got it together and I made up all of my credits, and I actually finished high school ahead of time. So I went from a near dropout to just getting it together very quickly and completing all of my credits and graduating ahead of time. So I took the first semester off after graduating high school to be with my infant. And then it wasn't until January, the spring semester, where I went to my community college. So once I was in my community college, I did join a Chicano student activist group known as MECHA. And that stands for Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán. And so which means the Chicano student movement. Basically, that's what it means. And so that's when I began to, that was the beginnings of my politicization, where I was like, oh, so there's injustice happening around us, and there's this systemic injustice. So I started to put the pieces together, and it really helped me heal in a lot of ways, because I began to forgive myself, because I understood why my family was in the situation that we were in. And it helped me forgive my father and move forward. And so I really wanted to spread awareness in my community and fight for my community and fight against all of these injustices. And so I was doing really, really well at the college level. I was in the honors program, all that good stuff. And I had my academic counselor tell me that I was doing well, and that I should think about transferring. And I didn't even know what that meant. I said, transfer, but I'm behaving, I'm doing well. Why do you want to get rid of me? Because that's what I was used to.
Right.
That's what I was used to in high school. It's like, what are you talking about? She's like, no, you can transfer to a university. I'm like, what? I'm like, where, how, what? And so I didn't realize that you're supposed to apply to various universities and hope that you get into one of them. So I only applied to UC Santa Barbara. And I applied under the major of Chicana and Chicano Studies, and thankfully I got in. So, and I went to school with my 4-year-old. At that time, he was 4, and was able to get student family housing near campus and all that good stuff. And so it was just that added layer of a challenge for being a first generation woman of color, single mom, first time in her family, to navigate this huge academic system. And so, my first quarter there, I was pretty much in tears every day, because it was just so much.
Overwhelming.
It was very overwhelming. I was trying to do the best that I could for my son and set a good example. And at the same time, I felt very guilty for moving him away from the only family he ever knew. And so it was definitely a struggle, and he definitely had to sacrifice along with me.
So I'm just curious. I'd love to get into a really specific time when you're doing this and you're crying in the evenings after the baby's gone to sleep, and you're trying to keep yourself together. Was there someone or something that happened that was now that you look back, you wouldn't have known at the time, but when you look back now, was there somebody that entered your life at that time, or some conversation you had, or something that happened that you went, oh yes, I'm where I need to be. This is right. It's hard, but it's right.
Yes. A professor by the name of Yolanda Broiles Gonzalez. she became like a second mom to me. And oh my goodness, thank goodness she was there. And she understood my struggle, and she saw the potential in me as an academic, as a scholar, and she saw the passion and everything that drove me and the reasons why. And so she really took me under her wing. And like I said, at that time, I was really discovering my indigeneity as well. Mm-hmm. And so she was also a woman who identified as an indigenous Chicana and participated in indigenous traditions and ceremonies. And she took me under her wing. And those teachings were very healing for me, and gave me a home base, gave me a sense of strength.
How did you meet her?
In one of the classes. She was a professor within the discipline. So
how did you know? Like, I'm digging, because I know that there's a moment. I know there's a moment where you looked at each other and you just knew that this was going to make the difference, or she said something to you, maybe something that hurt your feelings, or something that triggered that sudden realization that this was, something different.
Everything, the details of it all are so foggy to me, because we're talking 24 years ago. Uh-huh. But in general, I just remember being in her class, and just even the way she walked into class with her long hair and her indigenous blouse and earrings, and just like, whoa, this woman totally embraces, like, who is she and what is this? And she didn't look like your typical professor. She was very much embracing her indigeneity and her aesthetics and how she presented herself.
Do you remember what the room looked like?
It was the standard, like not too exciting. Hall? Yeah, it was a lecture hall, and within Chicano studies, the classrooms aren't that big. So I did take other classes that, had 100, 200, 300 students. But in Chicano studies, we typically had 20 to 30 students in a classroom. And so it was just your typical, I just remember white walls and it being very bright. And so she was the most colorful part of that classroom. And I think, and being an artist and being a visual learner, like, I was just drawn to her aesthetic. And then the way that she spoke in she was just such a strong woman that I just admired that so much, and how she was just very firm in being indigenous and being unapologetic about it. And I just loved that about her. And then I think if anything, there was a spark in me, but there was also a spark in her by the way that I was responding or engaging in dialogue in class that made her kind of look at me like, oh, there's something to her. There's something to Veronica that I need to learn a little bit more about. And so I just remember going to her office hours and connecting with her. And I gravitated to her because I needed to feel like I was around family, because that's what I was used to. And so I was able to connect with her, and we got to know each other. And so she really understood where I was as a single mom searching for my identity. And, so she just took me under her wing. And then I, shortly after that, was able to connect with another student on campus who was already part of the Aztec dance group in the Santa Barbara area. There was an event, I think it was a multicultural event or something on campus, and the Aztec dancers came to be part of that. And I recognized one of the students from one of my classes. So then I asked her, like, hey, like, how do you do that? Or how does one get involved? Is it a closed group? Is it an open group? She's like, oh, no, it's always open to the community. We practice, in Santa Barbara at La Casa de la Raza. You can come. We have practices on such and such day. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go check it out. And so I did. And that was just like that whole other chapter of discovering myself, like, whoa, what is this? It's so beautiful. And so, yeah, that was a whole other chapter that I just fell in love with.
Oh, I just got a chill when you said the name of the location. Can you say that again? The location of where the practices were?
Yes. Casa de la Raza, which means home or house of the people. And actually just recently, that's a very historic, building in Santa Barbara that was established during the Chicano civil rights movement of the 1960s and 70s, which was also when the Chicano Studies Department was created at UC Santa Barbara. So that's where anything and everything that happens that is really about the Chicano community or the Mexican American community happens. And just recently, it was under threat of being taken away. And so there was this whole movement and organizing to try to make it a historic landmark in Santa Barbara to save it. And so we won that battle just very recently. And I just say we because we as a people, but I've been so busy organizing for Ventura and LA that all the credit goes to the Santa Barbara organizers for pushing that. And so that was a victory. So we were able to save it. But I can't imagine that just going away. And it just played such a pivotal role in my life at the time.
It was your family. And as you said, growing up in such a tight family with so many children in it, I can imagine the loneliness and isolation you would feel without surrounding yourself with a similar vibe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, now that you're saying that, it's just so normalized for me because that's all I've ever been around. But now that you're saying that, you're right. I gravitate to groups of people, and I feel like I need to be around a lot of people all of the time. And I'm definitely okay with being alone. I definitely need alone time to decompress from everything, but and I'm okay with that. But my life wouldn't feel complete without being around people. I love being around people.
Well, I'm still visualizing you sitting in class at a desk and watching this stunning woman walk in. It's so colorful in such a drab, industrial, institutional kind of room. And I'm imagining your expressions because you were, 19 at the time?
I was, I want to say about 21. Because I did go to community college first and then I transferred.
Oh, 21. Okay. Right. Okay. So you're 21 and you haven't explored that side of you at all. Do you remember kind of what your style was at the time? Was it jeans and a t-shirt or did you have your own style at that point?
I did develop some style at that point just because of my experience at the community college with the student group. But it developed much more while I was at UCSB and then much more when I became an Aztec dancer. And so, I did wear more traditional clothing, whether it was the traditional Mexican huipil tops, the indigenous ones, not the big ruffly ones that are very folklorico. Or like the very stereotypical, but the authentic type of clothing, and wearing the turquoise and the jade and the obsidian, and just really gravitating to that so much more. And I'm still like that today. I'm always wearing something that is very much representative of my culture. And all of my artwork revolves around that as well. So yeah, I definitely developed a style, and the more time I spent at UCSB and the more relationships I established with people and I found my people on that campus, then the more that style evolved and the more proud I was to wear it. And I wore it purposefully because I felt like there were so many hundreds of years of colonization that were trying to erase us as a people. That was my way of like a daily protest, right? Of like, you're not going to erase us. Here we are.
Yes.
And so I every day I'm wearing something just to push back on the attempted erasure of who we are as a people.
So for our listeners, I do have some photographs that I'll include in the blog post associated with this podcast so that you get a better feel for the colorful style and also the Aztec dance. Is it a costume? Would you consider it a costume?
We call it regalia.
What is it called?
Regalia.
Regalia. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So similar to the Native American tribes. Okay. So we will have pictures of that for our listeners so that you can see some of what we're talking about here, because I've seen some of these pictures and they're just stunning. And that's why I had to ask, because I see so much of that in many of us who have had that kind of experience of assimilation. And I've never been one to hide my Jewish heritage, even though I'm not a particularly strong practicing Jew. I still I don't take the luxury that I have. I have the luxury of fitting in and not telling people. As a white woman, I have that luxury, but I don't take it. Anytime I have an opportunity, I tell people that I'm Jewish because I feel that solidarity with people of color of that those attempts at assimilation. And I when you were talking about your wearing turquoise and the obsidian as almost a protest statement, I think about that so much when I tell people that I'm Jewish. It's kind of a protest statement. You cannot assimilate me.
Right.
And one of the things my sister and I talked about many years ago was that she talked to a rabbi about why some level of being kosher is better than not having some decision about keeping kosher. And that means not eating pork products, not eating shellfish, not mixing milk and meat. And in my family, even though we were pretty traditional, we didn't keep kosher, but we never had pork products in the house. That was our statement. That was our form of protest, not having pork products in the house. And I remember talking to my sister, and she said that a rabbi told her that is, they used a pig, they sacrificed a pig on the altar in the first temple in order to desecrate the temple. And that's why she doesn't eat pork, is because that's her statement. Even though she'll eat lobster and shrimp, that's not a problem, but no pork because of that statement. And I think you and I probably have this in common. I eat bacon. I know I'm a terrible Jew, but I eat bacon partly to spite that. It's like, see, I can be Jewish and still eat bacon. I don't know. Maybe it's an Aries thing. It's a spite thing for me sometimes, but I don't eat a lot of it. But every time I eat it, I think, so in your face, I'm still Jewish.
I hear you. And I totally, I can relate to what you're saying. So even though I'm Mexican, I'm a light-skinned Mexican. And when we think about indigenous people from Mexico, you don't typically, see them or imagine them to look like me. And so thinking about the caste system in Mexico and how the lighter you are, the better off you are, and the less discriminated you'll be. And I can live that life if I want to, but I cannot unlearn the history of my people and the struggles of my ancestors. Like, I can't unlearn that. And so I choose to be in the trenches, and I choose to fight alongside them as a lighter skinned woman. And I understand that it gives me certain privileges that it doesn't give my darker skinned, beautiful brothers and sisters. I can be in spaces to advocate and fight for them when those spaces don't even allow to have an open door to them. And so I understand that I have to use my privilege to navigate and to fight for them whenever I can, and to fight for us, because we are all in this together. And like my mom says, it's not our fault that we're so mixed at this point, and so no one should take away any of our identities, and whatever we want to embrace, that's our right to embrace.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. Is your mom still living?
She is. My mom is 84 years old.
I just got a chill thinking about all that she's been through and the beauty that she's experiencing now as a grandmother and probably great grandmother.
Yes. And so she's just such an amazing woman. The most intelligent, wise woman that I have met in my life. And again, she doesn't have a formal education, but she is just so wise and so knowledgeable. And I love having conversations with her about what's happening around the world, because she just has such a great understanding and perspective on all of that really, she's not bogged down with the many different versions of the narratives that we are confronted with within academia. She's just like, this is my human perspective to this, and she just brings it back down to the basics, but in the most wisest way. And it's like, oh yeah, Mom, thank you for reminding me about that. Sometimes we let our minds and spirits become so busy with all of these details and complicated narratives that really sometimes we just need to get back down to the basics of who we are as human beings.
Right. So she has a magical way of simplifying.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So this is a perfect opportunity in terms of wrapping up our conversation. Tell me a story about relatively recently when your mom saw you in your regalia, or really just demonstrating the power of your ethnicity and culture, and what that was like when she saw you. Do you remember a moment when she either said something or you just saw it in her face?
I remember when my family's all still very Catholic. And so it was difficult for her when I left the Catholic Church and really converted back into my indigenous spirituality. That was difficult for her at first. But she also understood, she came to understand that my involvement in the tradition was very healing for me. And she remembers how much of a hot mess I was as a teen and being a Catholic. And it was really hard for me to be a Catholic because there's so much guilt that comes with that religion. And it was so difficult to live with myself with all that guilt and being such a sinner in the eyes of the church. And so that didn't help me at all as I was trying to heal from all the trauma. And so becoming a monastic dancer, she eventually came to understand that it was my saving grace, that it was healing me, and that it was making me a much happier and productive person and a positive person living my life with purpose. And so she came to accept that and embrace that. And so particular time was when my daughter, 7 years after my son was born, I had a daughter, and both sets of grandparents, very Catholic, were very adamant about her being baptized in the Catholic Church. And my husband at the time, I'm no longer married, but my husband at the time, her father was like, these are our families. And I'm like, okay, let's make a deal. We'll go ahead and baptize her in the Catholic Church. But then when we go to the park afterwards to celebrate, we're going to have a traditional Aztec ceremony for her and bathe her in corn. So she has both ceremonies. And he's like, okay, that's a deal. And so everyone was okay. Everyone was okay with that. So I think that was the first time that my mom was really able to see a full-on traditional ceremony and, seeing her granddaughter and her daughter and her grandson. My son was a drummer. He was a little boy, but he was a really good drummer. He was drumming for the ceremony. She just saw us as a family unit and how that was important for us as a family. And so she was just very, it was very touching for her. I was worried that it might offend her, or my in-laws, the other grandparents, that it might offend them, but they actually really, really loved it. And I just remember how she was just so proud of us, so proud of us reconnecting with something that was part of all of our families, but we had lost touch with, and that we were able to bring it back to our family story.
I can imagine the energy outside during the ceremony. Like, I'm sitting here with tears in my eyes, imagining the energy that surrounded you from your in-laws and your mom, and I'm assuming your siblings, at least some of them were there.
Yes.
And being just so, I don't know, taking that vibration to a higher level. I'm imagining, I'm feeling it as you describe it to me. Can you describe just briefly a little bit about bathing in corn? What does that look like?
Sure. And I do want to share actually that the professor who became like my second mom, Yolanda Broiles Gonzalez, she actually did the ceremony for us. I know.
Love. You're going to make me cry.
So, so we had our circle of Aztec dancers in the middle. We have our altar on the ground on the Mother Earth with, all of the offerings that represent the four directions, the four elements, whether it was earth, wind, water, and fire. So we place, objects there that represent each of those elements. And of course, the corn, lots of ears of corn that are, create the circle, the border of the circle outside of us, along with flowers in between. You just imagine this huge circle on the grass with, corn, ears of corn, and flowers. Mm-hmm. And so all the Aztec dancers are in the middle in a circle. And then in the very center of the circle is the altar with the offerings of the corn. And Yolanda and myself and my baby girl and her daddy. And, she just talked about how in our culture, in our indigenous culture, our creation story has a lot to do with corn, and how when humans were created, we didn't have anything to sustain us until corn was invented and discovered. And so we began to eat the corn, and then we were able to sustain our lives and fully evolve as humans. So our creation story, it has a lot to do with us believing that corn is sacred and we are people of the corn. And so when babies are baptized within this tradition, we take, some of the corn in a molcajete, which is a bowl that is made out of volcanic rock. And oftentimes, our mothers and grandmothers make chile out of it, salsa out of it, in it, I should say, smashing all of the ingredients together. Mm-hmm. So we just kind of, shuck the corn and smash the kernels in there with some water until we have a very liquidy corn substance. And then we rub that substance all over the baby. And while we're saying that, we're saying we are of corn. When I open my eyes, I see corn. When I smell corn. When I taste corn. My heart is made of corn. My blood is made of corn. My flesh is made of corn. My bones are made of corn. My spirit is made of corn, because we're people of the corn. And so in that sense, she was baptized in both traditions, but it's such a beautiful ceremony for babies, and to just really acknowledge that we are indigenous. And oftentimes they are presented to the community with their indigenous names. So that they are recognized as indigenous people.
Wow. I can just imagine your mom watching this and tearing up and feeling that sense of connection, because that's part of her as well. And maybe at that point was when she realized, oh, this is part of me as well. Maybe that was part of her ability to let go of what she was concerned about in terms of the loss of the Catholicism aspect, understanding that she was also connected to it because this was her as well.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And as years went on, and conversations that we would have, she started to lean more that way. Before it was just like, that has nothing to do with us. What are you doing? I don't understand the obsession. And then eventually came to like, that's a beautiful part of who we are, and no one should ever take that away from us. And so we've come a long way. We've definitely come a long way.
Yes. It sounds like it. I think we all do with our mothers, especially mothers and daughters, such interesting and complicated relationships.
Yes.
Oh, and that added just another twist to it. And I keep coming back to, I have a similar twist with my mom because I'm not particularly practicing, and she is. And when my boys were little, it was always, you have to do this with the boys so they understand their identity. And she really didn't understand why I wasn't going to synagogue, why it wasn't a big part of my life, because that's not how you were raised. And so I'm definitely, this is all resonating so strongly with me. And if it's resonating with me and you're telling this story, so it's clearly a big part of your identity and your relationship with your family and your mother, I know our listeners are also feeling that tension and love, that contradiction that we all face when it comes to us and our parents, and how we choose to move forward in our own lives while still acknowledging and valuing and trusting in the identities that came before us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And I think that my mother understands now that in me trying to preserve these traditions is also preserving who she is and who my grandmother was and who her grandmother was.
That's beautiful. Veronica, this has been such a treat. I can't even describe. I'm actually kind of at a loss for words right now. So thank you so much for recording this with me and being so generous in your sharing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to relive a lot of that and to just be raw with it and share my emotions. And yeah, that was interesting for me as well. I wasn't expecting for all of those emotions to resurface, but I'm glad that they did because it keeps me centered and focused in the work that I do. So thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. If you're planning an event or company retreat and want to bring in a memorable, entertaining, and highly practical speaker as your keynote speaker or workshop facilitator, please visit us at elkinsconsulting.com to learn how we can help and provide a memorable keynote or breakout session. Thank you. I look forward to hearing from you.